In this episode of the Exploring Information Security Podcast, how do Macs get malware? Welcome to the Exploring Information Security Podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring how do Macs get malware? Joining me today to help answer this question is Wes Widner. Wes, how are you?
I'm doing great, Tim.
So, Macs get malware? Like, how is this possible?
Yeah, Macs do get malware, although Apple doesn't really want to admit it. It took Apple getting compromised with a widespread outbreak for Apple to actually care about the security, but most recently there's been some high-profile Macs that are getting targeted. More specifically, the App28 Fancy Bear attack that attacked the DNC. It turns out that there was a Mac malware element to that. You don't really see a whole lot of widespread malware that just gets dropped on everybody, but when you do, it's mostly adware.
Okay, so and that's it's more. So you're saying it's more like nation state type stuff, and we're not seeing as much criminals, or are you kind of seeing a trend moving towards more criminal type of activity?
Yeah, the criminal activity is mostly opportunistic. There's only been two ransomware attacks for Macs, but more and more it's mostly targeted that you hear about. So like the Dalai Lama in I think 2012 was attacked. The group that handles his information security, they decided that they'd all get Macs, and then lo and behold, they were hacked very shortly after that. And I think a lot of it has to do with Macs are in that space where they're not really widespread. So anybody who's looking to create a botnet is not going to really be served well by attacking Macs. However, Macs are used by a lot of high-profile targets. So the attacks they tend to be a lot more sophisticated when they do happen, but they're not really uncovered. You don't see like tons of malware coming through.
Okay, so what got you into Mac malware?
So I was running a malware pipeline for Norse, and we were just getting tons of malware in, gigs of malware. And out of that, after Norse kind of folded, I wanted to keep on with a Mac malware pipeline to kind of pull it apart, see what's going on. So, and I didn't want to flood myself with just all the malware that's out there. So I decided to specialize just in Mac malware. And with that, I created macmalware.manway.io, and that's where I just pull off like some interesting malware, just malware as it comes through a feed. And most of that ends up being adware. But the second thing that drew me to Mac malware is most of my kids have laptops, and like a good geek dad, I get them good equipment. So that kind of translates to them having MacBook Airs, and my daughter was playing Minecraft, and she wanted to do mods for it. And one of the best ways to get malware for almost anything is to go and find intentionally something that will modify other hardware or other software. So it got me wondering, what could she get into, and what would it actually look like? Would I even be able to tell what an outbreak on a Mac would look like? So that kind of led me down this whole road of looking into Macs and the security that's there, and what threats are out there, all that.
So, and that makes me think of, so you're essentially looking for signs that there's a malware. You know, it's pretty obvious with like a Windows machine where the computer's slowing down, or I guess not as much now, but like back in the day, it's like just a bunch of pop-ups and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on Windows, I know where the persistence is. I know I know the registry keys and the startup places, all of that'll be modified. I know how to open up, the PowerShell from sysinternals and look at all the processes that are running. And I can you develop a sense of what a virus looks like as it's running on a system. But on Macs, it turns out you can kind of tell there too, but it's a little bit more subtle.
So we were both at B-Sides Huntsville recently, and you gave a great talk on Mac malware. which is kind of why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because it was a really good talk. A worm in the apple exploration of Mac malware. So what, and that kind of went through the history of Mac malware. What is the history of Mac malware?
Yeah, so I kind of bolted that on. I did the talk first in B-Sides Augusta, and then I thought, based on the reactions that people had, that I needed to go back and really expand on the history of it, because Apple for the longest time has been saying that, Macs don't get PC viruses. And all the way up until 2012, they would say that. And then something happened in 2012 that I argue basically was the defining moment of malware for Macs. And it was the flashback virus. And that went through and infected 600,000 Mac systems. And in particular, it affected Apple employees. And like I said earlier, that's really where Apple really got serious about Mac security, not because of the customers necessarily, but because of their own employees were getting targeted. So before that, though, the actual first malware that ever infected an Apple computer, it wasn't a Mac, but it was the Elk bootloader for the Apple IIgs. So viruses are part of Mac history from way, way back when. And the other notable part of the Mac malware history is Word and Excel macro viruses. This was way back on the Mac 1, and I forget the version number that came shortly after that. But Word and macro viruses were cross-platform way back. And it's interesting that now you're seeing the Word and Excel macro viruses coming back. That was actually what was used in the App 28 Fancy Bear attack. In the history of Mac malware, if you took your computer, and even today, if you take your computer to the Genius Bar, they'll largely tell you that you should stop browsing porn or you should stop going to pirate sites. Because the line from Apple is, if you just stick with the App Store, then you'll be fine. And for the most part, that's sort of true. This is also one of the reasons that, and I'm not going to go into the whole part of it, but the iPhone tends to be a bit more secure than the Android, mostly because they've locked it down. It's a walled garden. But so the history of Mac malware it's not as prolific. You're talking about maybe 200 to 300 samples a year versus the hundreds of thousands that you see for Windows. But then again, it's less than 10% of the computing population. So you shouldn't expect to see that much.
So what do you see the future going forward for Mac malware? Is this going to become more of a problem?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be a problem in that that you're going to see like widespread outbreaks or Macs become part of botnets, because like I said, your pool of Macs to choose or to pull into a botnet is really small. But the more you see companies move to issuing employees Macs, and as a general practice, the more higher profile people you see using Macs, the more the attacks will be targeted. So if you're going to, like the Fancy Bear attack, if they wanted to get certain targets in the DNC, well, they're all walking around with their hipster mustaches and everything with Macs under their arms. So you need to be able to attack that. And so you're seeing two things in the Mac malware world. The viruses are getting more sophisticated, and there's a whole lot of history behind what Macs were based on. The OS X operating system has a rich history. It comes from the Next OS kernel, and there's just all kinds of really cool stuff in there. But you also have like 30 years of just cruft that's built up. And so at the beginning of this year, for instance, there was a virus that came out, and it turns out it was using a flaw that had been in the Mac system for like 10 years, and it just had been unnoticed. So you are seeing more and more Mac malware, but it's more targeted too. And then the other side of that, you're seeing companies that are starting to become more and more intentionally, they're becoming more and more intentional about securing Macs that their employees have. So like Yelp came out with a good forensics tool that they could use to kind of pull out all the memory and all the artifacts and look through that. And I think there's a really good talk by a GitHub engineer, because most of their employees use Macs as well. So yeah, you're seeing both sides built up.
So, and you just mentioned a tool, and that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is what can people do to protect themselves against malware on Macs? Well,
it's kind of weird to say this, but there's a program called Little Snitch that is basically it's a paid firewall for the Mac, which seems kind of weird because the Mac already comes with 2 different firewalls built into it already. But most of the malware that I've seen for Mac will explicitly look for Little Snitch and refuse to run if it sees it. It's pretty weird. And then there's also the old standby you could always use, or just try to use App Store apps, but that's really unrealistic for most people.
Yeah. There's that little setting that says don't allow installs from unknown or outside sources. I can't remember the exact terminology, but right. I was trying to install OWASP Zap, which is the dynamic analyzer, and it was barking at me for that.
Yeah, and if you have to install Java or anything that development wise, you're probably going to use Brew, which means that you're probably going to open yourself up to all the side channel attacks. Yeah. A really good source of not open source, but free utilities comes from a Mac Malware researcher by the name of Patrick Wardle from Objective-C. So he has utilities like Knock Knock and Block Block, and I know that they're not really original, but they work really well. So Knock Knock will actually show you all of the persisted applications that are set to start up every time you start your Mac. And Block Block will alert you and really get annoying about anything that goes to try to modify system settings. And so, sure, you could kind of click through those and shoot yourself in the foot anyway. But I think these are just letting you know what's going on in the background is one of the first steps towards security. So with Block Block, for instance, I installed that on my Mac a while back, and I didn't realize that this pop-up comes up and it says the shove driver wants to install or pull down an update and install something. And I thought, great, this means that I've been infected and all this other stuff. So I went to look for it, and it turns out Apple has a background service to silently, automatically update USB drivers on the fly without even asking you. So that was an interesting find there, and that's actually one of the avenues of some malware's attacks.
Yeah, wasn't there some recent stuff about using USB on a Mac to get credentials or something?
Oh yeah. There's all kinds of physical attacks. So one of the consequences of Apple cutting down the number of ports. So a while back there was the Thunderbolt direct memory access attack, and cutting down the ports on a Mac really means that they're just combining the functions of these ports. So the USB-C ports that are used on iPhone and on the newer Macs, those have the ability to do direct memory access as well. In fact, when the FBI takes an iPhone or a Mac, that's what they'll plug into, is whatever the either the USB-C or the display, Thunderbolt display, and do a direct memory dump of everything. And that's the only way around that is if you have a boot sector password set and power down your Mac. But how many of us power down our Macs completely, or just have it soft locked there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually going back to your first tool, which was Little Snitch, I recently just bought that because, like you mentioned, I'd read an article about some malware that said that it looked, and I believe it was like malware that's in memory, so it's like even really hard to detect. But if it sees Little Snitch in there, it's just like, nope, not gonna even bother. I will say that if you get Little Snitch, prepare to configure it.
Right,
If
right.
anyone runs NoScript, it's NoScript on steroids. It doesn't just do browser; it does absolutely everything, which actually has turned out to be very useful in evaluating different stuff. So a couple tools that we're looking to install. It's actually really good for seeing what's talking to what. So it's actually a pretty good, on top of protecting the computer a little more, if you have to do any kind of evaluation for other apps for your organization, it's really good. And all I did was just take a screenshot, allow, and just kind of map how that app is talking out. And you'll get some pretty interesting stuff just from that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like I said, one of the first security steps is to just know thyself, know what's going on.
Right.
So you mentioned the passwordless or the diskless malware. That reminds me of the malware that came out right around February 8th. There's a good threat post on it. It's there's a backdoor utility called Empyre, EMPYRE, and from what they say on their blog, it's based off of EMPIRE, which is a whole framework for PowerShell exploits. It's kind of like Metasploit, but a different route. This is through the Python interpreter, which is built into all Macs. Empyre, though, was actually, it was a proof of concept. People were using it. Came out middle of last year. Well, it turns out in the Russia hack that came out in the App 28, Empyre was used almost wholesale in this malware. So it's kind of funny that we're finding researchers' tools, and that whole Empyre is all in memory, based off of the macro viruses.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, macros are making a comeback, all thanks to getting Microsoft Word and Excel on Macs. I hate
Yeah, and in fact, it's funny that, so not only do you get the documents themselves that are infected, but there's another one. So the latest version of ransomware for Mac is based off of getting a patch, or it's called the Patcher virus, and it's from pirated copies of Office, and it'll ask you, do you want to patch, this Office or whatever? When you click patch, it'll actually throw up some built-in alerts from Mac. But if you're already insistent on trying to patch a pirated copy of Office, you're probably going to click through it anyway. And what it'll do is it'll go through and encrypt the whole system, and then throw up the whole, pay us ransomware, whatever, to get it back.
Again, a little snitch will help with hopefully identifying that. Because you're like, wait, this isn't going to Microsoft or whatever pirated thing. This is going somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, that particular virus, the Patcher, it's another one of those that explicitly looks for little snitch.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Little protection. Get your little snitch is it's kind of your bouncer of the club, bouncer of your Mac.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, the number of viruses that explicitly look for that program. Like I said before, it's kind of, I don't like to really pitch any one particular thing, especially if it's a paid product. But I'm telling you, if you find it in a lot of these viruses, then must be something to it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. All right. So what resources are available for someone who wants to know more about Mac malware?
Well, I have an OS 10 security awesome list. And can we get that in the show notes?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm trying to work on that list. I add to it every now and then, and I welcome any and all contributions. I've got a pretty healthy list there already. And off of that, there's tons of news sources. There's several really great guys on Twitter that are sharing things on that. In fact, today there was a public spat on there with one Mac Malware researcher and Cylance, which is, I think a lot of these attacks are overly sophisticated because people leave there's so many lower hanging fruit, but it's nice to know of theoretical vulnerabilities. All
right. So, Blinks, what was is your awesome list? Where's that located at?
That's on GitHub. That's, github.com/KAI5263499/OSX-security-awesome.
Okay. And then we'll also have a list of people to follow on Twitter as well in the show notes. So be sure to do that. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't already discussed?
Well, a lot of what goes, so Macs share the same operating system with iOS. So if you're able to find a kernel exploit in your Mac, there's a really good chance that that kernel exploit will translate over into the phone. Now, one reason that you're not seeing a whole lot of Mac malware is that they'll save their best work on that, especially kernel exploits, for the phone. And that's where you've got companies out of Israel, like the one that ended up selling the FBI the backdoor access to the San Bernardino killers' phones. Those types of exploits go as high as $500,000. So, just like what we saw with the Stuxnet that had several 0 days in it, you're not going to find that just being spread out all over the web. It's going to be a very targeted thing. So, like last year, we had a human rights activist in the UAE, and he was being the government there actually bought an exploit from the same group that sold the backdoor access to the San Bernardino killers' phones. They bought it just to target that one person. So, my point with all that is, basic security measures will keep you generally safe, but if somebody's determined enough to get into your system, don't think that a Mac is inherently more secure than Windows. Truth is, it hasn't really been tried, and there's a lot of hidden vulnerabilities that even Apple's not fully aware of.
Right. Well, and the good old phishing, and
Yeah, just the old standbys. And actually, I would argue that I think that Mac users. We were talking before the show began that was up in Gatlinburg recently and went into a zip line place. And while we were waiting to get fitted with all of our gear, I was looking around and looking at their security posture. And this was a typical hipster store, and they had tons of iPhone or iPad 1s for their check-in kiosks, and none of their plugins were secured there. And there's a juice jacking attack that's been out for the longest time that all of those would have been susceptible to. And then they had two iMacs that were just sitting there logged in, and one of them was playing music, and the other's there for pulling pictures off and getting all that ready. Both of them were logged in completely, and I know that the people running the store were just thinking, well, Macs are inherently more secure, and we don't have that much to worry about. So I think paradoxically, Macs are less safe because of the social engineering that's been done by Apple to kind of spread that misinformation out there.
Right.
So there was an ad that I saw recently so Apple abandoned their whole Macs don't get PC viruses, but they picked up this recent thing of they're trying to push the big giant iPad, the Mac Pro or Mac, iPad Pro.
The Surface Pro? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, it's basically like the Surface. But yeah, they're trying to sell that, and they're saying, oh, if you get the iPad Pro, it doesn't get PC viruses either. And I was actually kind of heartened on that when I clicked into it on Facebook, and there's a ton of comments there, and a lot of the people there were just kind of rolling their eyes and saying, no, guys, at this point, we're pretty sure that you're just as vulnerable as most of the other systems.
Yeah. Someone out there is going, challenge accepted.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So what would you like to plug?
Well, I already plugged my awesome list and Twitter.
No, I don't think you didn't do yourself for Twitter.
Oh, Twitter's. Yeah, it's the same crazy string of characters. So Twitter is KAI5263499. I'm trying to put together a small business pen testing type outfit or offering. So, yeah, if you have any suggestions on that, I welcome any feedback.
All right, cool. And you've also got a link here for your slide deck from B-Sides Huntsville. which I will put in the show notes. Are you planning to give that talk anywhere else in the near future?
I submitted to Knoxville, so I'm going to try to give it there one more time. This year I was really trying to focus more on getting a CEH certified, but you know what? It's actually just really fun to go around and hang out with security people. So I can't quit you guys.
Well, and you'll be at B-Sides Augusta, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, that's my hometown. I'm probably not gonna go back as a speaker this year, but I'm gonna go back and just wander around the halls.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you for joining me to discuss how Macs get malware. That will do it. Hopefully you learned something. Feedback is welcome at timothy.dblock@gmail.com or on Twitter @timothydblock. Show notes can be found at timothydblock.com/EIS. If you enjoyed the show, share it with others and rate it on iTunes. Have a good one.